Wonderful. Thank you for the introduction. And first of all, I got to thank my panelists, and some of them are in the late evening hours to joining this event and contributing their knowledge and expertise to this discussion. And thank you for everyone joining us in this event. We really appreciate it. And hopefully you get something, you take away some insights from our panelists. And if you have any questions, reach out to me in LinkedIn. We'll continue our discussion. So who is Securli? Securli is a Hong Kong cyberport incubator developing a hyper-automation system to be the most trusted cybersecurity organization in the world. That's a big tall order. With our 20 plus years of InfoSec operation experience, we saw the weakness in cybersecurity is one simple word: communications. And communications broke down among the three groups of stakeholders: the business leaders, the governors, such as like compliance and risk managers, and the technologists. And the disconnect in that communications leads to operational risk and providing opportunity for the hackers to plan their cyber attacks. So Securli's provide the value are very straightforward, with fair, balanced, and integrity, along with data science to bring your organization's data alive. So you can start the communications by visualizing, and which I'm going to demonstrate, with a quick slide on what we mean by visualizations. Just one simple slide. So with this as our dashboard, single dashboard environment, we can help company to reduce their task planning process by anywhere from 30 to 60 days. And because this is very objective-oriented roadmap that we are providing, so we can help to reduce the time frame to resolve the security incidents. And with automation, we can even speed up the efficiency in the future time. And our current development is we want to enhance your data privacy and sovereignty with blockchain technology, and which Samuel is going to talk a little bit more about it. How do you manage to regain your data? And which Carter is going to share more about how this related to smart cities, and Kyle to talk about the management aspect, and also the cultural difference between Asia Pacific and US and Northern America, how the management would be different in managing the cultural aspect of this type of technology issue. And what we are trying to do is turning the intangible assets into something tangible. And along with your permission, allow the AI to provide your team with our preventive intelligence to further reduce the execution periods and human errors with data science. Well, without further ado, I'm going to let Sean to introduce our panel.
Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm very happy to introduce our panelists today. We have Kyle Lai. Kyle is the president and CEO of KLC Consulting, and Kyle works with U.S. organizations that work with the U.S. government and the Department of Defense. He has experience working with companies in Asia Pacific, both organizations and municipalities in Asia Pacific, dealing with cybersecurity and cyber risk and dealing with those issues. We also have Carter Schoenberg. Carter is the Vice President of Cybersecurity and Chief Cybersecurity Officer for SoundWay Consulting. Carter also works with organizations to achieve and maintain CMMC compliance. And it's a new standard here for the DoD, if some of you aren't familiar with what CMMC is. Carter's also the co-author of a publication with NIST, and let me get the title right, A Risk Management Approach to Smart City Cybersecurity and Privacy, that was published with NIST. And then also Samuel Ning. Samuel is the Director of Cybersecurity Analytics at ASTRI, which is the Hong Kong Applied Science and Technology Research Institute. And so with you three gentlemen, we have a great depth of knowledge about cyber resilience and how it relates to smart cities and how they can prepare themselves as we all move forward into a more connected world. So gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So what we're going to start talking about is we have many conversations between our events and roundtable discussion one-on-one. And one of the things about the communication is the definition. What is the definition of cybersecurity? what is the definition of cyber resilience when there are so many marketing terms and great marketing company and helping the technology company to keep tuning that types of term to fit their portfolio, the products of portfolio, and more importantly in our discussion today, how the cybersecurity, cyber resilience related to smart cities. And Carter, you have wrote a paper about this, so I'm going to start with you, please.
Oh, great. Well, again, it's a pleasure to be here. With regards to the paper that was just being referenced, a couple of chapters ago, one of the organizations that I was involved with was really focusing on challenges and initiatives that apply to smart city initiatives on a global scale. As a result of that, one of many challenges that was identified is we have heard of this risk is about people, process, and technology, like the three legs of the cornerstone of the cyber environment. But I would actually argue that there's now a fourth leg, and that applies to acquisition. So technology, people, process, and acquisition. And as Stanley made reference to earlier, the speed in which you're able to have visibility in terms of something going bump in the middle of the night, that speed actually translates to cost of ownership. In addition to that, it also has to be properly paired, if you will, with terms and conditions, that which is going to be defined as legally binding agreements between the offerer and the offeree. And this is where the whole theory of supply chain cyber risk management really comes into play. Right now, when you talk about cybersecurity, what does that really mean? There's a lot of different terms out there, as Stanley made reference to. Information security, data security, computer security, information assurance. Is cybersecurity spelled with one word? Is spelled with two words? There's a lot of different variances that are out there. But from the general consensus now is that cybersecurity is really about focusing more on it being a tenet of business risk, no different than fire, theft, or flood. Core components including not only technical, but operational, which will also envelop physical security, and managerial considerations. And what we mean by managerial considerations is when the leadership team is ultimately responsible for the governance and the execution of policies and internal processes. So the document that was published by NIST was really focusing on how to give smart city business leaders that are responsible for the management of their infrastructures a blueprint, if you will, of when they are conducting business with their business partners, specifically their supply chain. What questions should they be asking them? There's a presumption that, well, we've always done it this way, but I think that we could also argue that more money is being spent on cyber today than ever before. And I don't really think anybody firmly believes that our risk posture is improving proportionate to that level of spend. So this document was actually.
Thank you, Carter. You mentioned, I want to, I don't want to lose track of what you talk about management. And that's where a good time for Kyle to come in, because Kyle, you have been a global CISO and you manage Asia Pacific as well as North America global companies. And from my observations, that's always been a huge difference in terms of how the cultural managing cybersecurity. And thank you, Carter. Yes, we understand there is a lot of definition. That's why we want to clarify. And now let's segment it to Kyle of talking about the management aspect of it with the cultural differences between the two regions of the world.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here. So I will say from the cultural differences, I think everybody is worried about the privacy, security, right? And I would say from the security, I would say US and Europe that have a few years of a head start compared to the Asian Pacific companies, and with US and European companies, because there are more years and into the business, they understand the risk a little bit more than the Asian companies. That's how I feel. But I actually just have based on my observation. And I would say US companies, they are more willing to spend money on the security. And I think there are going to be more security governance. I think they are a little bit more mature. And in terms of, Asian companies, I would say they're a little bit more conservative on the security spending at this time. However, I see them are catching up. I've worked in Hong Kong, Singapore, and the Japanese with Japanese firms, Chinese firms as well, Taiwanese firm as well. So I can see the change within the last 10 years. Asian companies, they're actually more and more willing to catch up, and to spend more money. Privacy as well. Privacy, I would say 10 years ago, some countries, they still use the equivalent of the social security number in the US as an ID. When people are asking you for the information, that's what people are willing to give out, that information very freely. Time has changed. So Asian culture, they have understanding the security, privacy a little bit more, and protect that personal information. So I think things are changing, and also the regulatory catching up. So there are GLBA from the GDPR from the Europe, right? So that's become a model for some of the countries, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, Japan, China. They're kind of mimicking, not really fully copying, right? But just adapting some of the good practices for protecting the personal privacy. And I can see there is a big change within the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I still remember when people giving out, their personal informations like there's nothing, it makes me cringe. And now even people in Hong Kong, when I travel, or in China, they start using VPN as much as they can on the mobile devices. So there is a shifting in that regard. And now, thank you, Kyle. From global, we talked about, the paper from conceptual into now reality, into the smart cities. And we also now touch on the regional. So I'm going to go to Samuel to talk about the local level and very ground level in Hong Kong. So of course, ASTRI is it's a quasi Hong Kong government entity that helping people to develop their intellectual properties in many different areas. What do you see in the definition of cyber resilience and cybersecurity, Samuel?
Okay. What I see, I'll split into two parts. One is the technical part, the other part is the compliances part. So I think I spend a lot of time balancing both. And besides that, I've spent a lot of time balancing between the technical side of things and to the senior management as well. So I can share some things about the banking sectors in Hong Kong. The regulations by the Hong Kong MA, I would say it's very strict, and they have been hiring very good technical people to be a case officer. And so the compliances level are very high here, and I can share a little bit about when we were launching a virtual bank, where the bank was actually born out in the cloud. We have our core banking system and stuff, everything in the cloud. So the audit can really go really deep of the cloud. So questions that I got asked is, how do I make sure that the administrator of the hypervisor cannot touch your data or any financial transactions or any customer data? So when it comes to all this compliance stuff, it's no longer technical stuff anymore. You need to get a lot of people involved. It's not like you're Rambo. You cannot fight this battle alone. We need to get all different parties to join around. So and to prove to our compliances and regulators, to give them comfort that we know what we are doing, and we know there's no 0% risk in any organization. And when something happens, we know what we are doing. That's how at first we we build our cyber defense around the compliances regulations first, because we don't want to spend over the board. You can put 20 locks in front of our doors, but you don't. If your house have only $20, you don't want to spend or you don't want to spend $100 to buy a lock. So that's why we always try to build around the compliances. Then only we walk an extra mile to improve our cyber resiliency from that part. So it's always a game of balance between security and compliances and security and convenience.
That's why we talked about, the visualization is very important, and because there are so many balls in the air that, how do you visualize together as a group and then prioritize and then tackle it like a roadmap, and what I keep using as a GPS, like a guidance system along the way. So, and then that, I think that also bring up to my next question to the panelists: what are the urgency? Why people even care? And I have actually poor experience with some of my experience, like Kyle talked about 10 years ago, in touch with an Asian company, publicly trading company, and their clients' intellectual property was stolen, and then the chairman and the founder of the company is, oh well, it's a technical issue. I said, oh my goodness, it's a technical issue. Of course, 10 years later, it's a completely different. So that brings up to the question of why is such an urgency? Why do we need to change with putting all these regulations put together, or the technical challenge, or the solution together? Why there are over 3,800 solutions out there? And who should be caring about increasing the cyber resilience level? And I'm going to go into Kyle first in this time, since we're talking about in Asia.
Right. I probably will just kind of talk about the smart city security, and I think kind of get into that because I think the urgency is really have to have a public and private partnership, because we are dealing with critical infrastructure. There are some increasing number of attacks, right? Cyber threats, physical and the cybersecurity, they are real, and that including terrorism and criminal activities, right? And Carter actually have mentioned that you really need to have the competent staff, the process and technology to protect not just the cybersecurity, but protect the safety of the citizens, right? And these are really I think there's so much information flowing around, and you really need to have some predictive technology, because we're too slow, right? We really have to define something that can be able to monitor and to be able to understand what is going on, and to be able to incorporate some of the predictive analytics and establish some of the risk management planning, and to have some real-time network monitoring and diagnostics. So when a threat is detected, preventive measure can be deployed right away. And I think these are something that we really have to, have a sense of urgency, because they're going to take some try and error to perfect the technology. However, I feel it is unfortunate that we are too slow. We really have to develop the technology really can help us, protect our physical critical infrastructure, and ultimately protect our citizens.
Great, and I think that the line for us is getting blurrier. What I mean by that is the public and private and needs to really work closer together, because the risk is everywhere. And that's part of it, why we talked about automation as the subject, today, is the emphasis on how can we automate the process and make it more transparent, accountability by using blockchain technology. And I'm going to turn to Samuel to talk about this as well, because, now we're going to touch on a little bit about, the public sector. And then I'm going to come back to you, Carter, to kind of address the issue from the government perspective, since you wrote that paper, and we have many conversations among ourselves, and Sean has a question, because yesterday we actually had a roundtable discussion with one of the world, I wouldn't mention the name IMF, but I would mention the title of the person because it's pretty up there in that organization. And we have a very frank discussion about this because we try to bring it open as much as we can. With what Samuel, you talk about the compliance issue, it needs to be transparent. It needs to be, public needs to see that information. But at the same time, the problem is we can't really show too much information. So now, blockchain technology, how we want to use blockchain technology as part of the example that I know, Samuel, you're going to share with that at the later part. But let's address the urgency first with how you from ASTRI talking about addressing that urgency issue and bridge the gap and open up the communication. That's what I was trying to say.
Well, that's a good point, and you remind me of working as a cybersecurity professional. Sometimes you have to be a salesman. That's not to say being a salesman, but I feel like a kid asking for my father to buy a new toy sometimes. Like Carl said, we need to have this tool, that kind of tools, But I used to get a question from a senior management saying that, hey, I'm going to use a metaphor. If I'm going to get a driving license, I'm going to spend $1,000 to get a driving license. And how many times I would get caught by the police over a year? Like if the summon is only $100, right? If I can get away, if I can, $800, I can get caught by the police for 8 times, I only pay like $800. So if I can get away, why would I spend money on the security tools that you're thinking about? So that's something that amused me with my senior management right at that time. So, but the point here is, I believe what's the urgency. So when we talk a lot about technical stuff, hackers attack us and stuff like that, they will just ask, so what's the impact? So I try to actually communicate the impact, what would happen. It's not only that your data will be lost, you might lose your reputation, you might lose your, if you were hacked, let's say a DDoS attack or someone hack into your server and delete everything else, that will cause a lot of business downtime. And let's say you have a downtime of 1 hour, how much money would that cost? And that would actually brings the confidence of let the senior management, we give a lot of information for them to make the decision. So that's what we do, and to bridge the gap and to let them know what's the urgency. It's cybersecurity is not only about technical. You need to relate the technical stuff to the business side of things. That's what I see from our perspective.
Yeah, and also, of course, money talks, right? So that's why we try to visualize the money part of and highlight the money part of it. Yeah. And of course, that's just the one aspect of the conversation. So Carter, I know that you have a lot of great experience, expressing the urgency to the government and partnering, and you've done a lot of work with the government aspect of the projects. How do you see that transitions, in the last few years? And now there are more regulations. Gartner has predicted that's going to be 75% of the world's data is going to be regulated by all the government entities around the world. And I see that's another, ka-ching, because that's more penalties going to be impacting. What is your opinion about that?
Yeah, so actually, I think Samuel's is a great illustration. So if the driver's license costs you $1,000, what is the actual chance that you're going to get pulled over? And if the most you can get for a ticket is $100, risk versus reward, okay. Incomplete though. What if that car gets into a wreck? If it's not a licensed driver, insurance is not bound to cover it. And I would say that is a one-for-one perfect example of what is going on in the corporate world right now as it's pertaining to this pivot of, well, it's just a technical issue to, I really need to focus more on this because my financial liability that is associated with this is going up at a geometric rate, and it's no longer to the point where I can ignore it. My board of directors are asking more about it. My customers are asking more about it. The citizens to which I'm entrusting the services for protection for first responders are asking for it. And now insurance companies are not only asking for it, but they're demanding proof of it. If you are an organization that is responsible for a municipality of any size, you have to take into consideration what is the new norm. The days of our rack servers in a corporate enterprise, that's the 1990s model. You have to think about 5G communications. You have to think about traffic monitoring sensors, stoplight cameras, high-end resolution that's going to be doing data feed for facial recognition where it's available and it is legal, and also facilities management. This culmination of network intersection and the culmination of data that is being aggregated creates a very unique target of opportunities for adversaries to cause significant financial harm to organizational business owners. And to Samuel's point, feel like a kid asking his parent for money or something like that. That's pretty much the paradigm that is now looking to be changed with data visualization. 65% of most human beings are visual learners. So the ability to be able to have that visual context with the type of program that Stanley is talking about here is not only valuable in terms of information, it's also valued in terms of speed to remove and to mitigate a potential threat, which also translates to reducing your total cost of ownership.
It would seem, Carter, then that type of information being fed into city management to deal with the risk, because as you were talking about earlier, so much is in the supply chain risk. Yep. And governments just don't have, while they do act sometimes, I think they have unconstrained amounts of money. When it comes to spending for things, there are budgetary constraints. So they don't have unlimited budget when it comes to cybersecurity. So they're going to have to outsource some of this stuff and consolidate it to people that are professionals, but that has to feed back in to the city because they can't dispense with all that risk to somebody else. Yeah. So where do they even start to even address that kind of risk? Because you're talking about so many different things being connected in a smart city.
I would say,
I
Sean,
think also that sorry, Carter, go ahead.
I would say the first place is you always want to first try to, if possible, start with the data. And what I mean by that is, if you understand what kind of citizens, what type of customers, what kind of employees are you supporting, what is the aggregation of that type of data set? And from there, you'll be able to better determine, are we talking, is it just within country? Is it transnational? Is it multinational? Then if you're able to make that determination on what are the regulatory requirements that are now imposed once that data transfers beyond that municipality to larger or geographic ranges, if you will. So if you are, let's say the city of Singapore, and you are managing a smart city architecture, if your service provider is in Australia, as an example, that data has now left the country boundary and gone to a different continent. And you could very well have significant implications for data privacy as a result of that.
Yeah, sorry, Carter, I cut you up. And then actually that brings up, what you talked about. It's basically bring up my next question about the micro trends. The micro trends that being impacting in the management of cybersecurity and the InfoSec professionals. And then of course the micro trends, what I'm referring to, there are a couple of them. One is the DevOps, the security effort to align to mitigate those business risks, not just business risk, but the data risk, that what we just collectively talked about. And also, what Samuel had talked about, the compliance, the GRC issues. So I'm going to jump into Samuel to go back into this micro trends discussions and talking about, the DevOps and security. How does that impact the DevOps and the security efforts with the cybersecurity professional that, this group of people are listening about? And in regards into the GRC, adding the additional complexity in terms of the technical part that Samuel, that you're referring to. Can you share your insight with us? Yeah.
I'm going to share from two perspectives. If putting myself as a regulator, I would actually put things 2 steps behind, because we're going to stay safe. I'm not saying that they are trying to play safe, but it's a bit putting a step backwards will be guarantee safetiness. That's how. But on the other perspective, putting myself as a developer, as a cybersecurity professionals or a business owner, I want to push things forward. I want things to be fast. I need new technologies like instead of building up a web server from scratch, I would use things like latest technologies like containerization, Kubernetes, and stuff like that. So, but there's always a battle between the regulations and the new technologies. The battle is always there. Take it or leave it, but it's always good to balance between them. And what we are doing in Hong Kong, it's while the regulators are trying to come up with new regulations like going to fintech and stuff, they will actually turn to the research centers, because we have the accountability to give the most accurate information to them, and they can draft or come up with new regulations with research perspective backing up them. That's how we do in Hong Kong. So that would balance between both, like developers want to be fast, but the regulators want to be slow. That's how we do it.
Sorry, you were breaking up. So
yeah, I apologize.
Or well, I just want to make sure that you have finished your comment before I move on to Carter's for his comment.
Yes, I do, but I'm not sure. Have you heard me well?
Yeah, it was just the last part that you as a regulator talked about, and bringing back into, just kind of summarize your conversation, that the regulator wants to be fast, the enterprise want to be fast, but then from the DevOps side, how fast can you be? You brought in Kubernetes, but then I thought about immediately talking about Log4j. So when lots of people, jump in and using pre-packaged development tool sets, and all of a sudden now, we got Log4j problem. We don't even know whether our code has a Log4j in there. So, of course, that needs to go back into my comment. Is just one takeaway from this is automation. How much can we automate? So did that kind of summarize what you said, Samuel?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you did.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to move on to Carter. Carter, what is your take about the micro trends? How does it impact, DevOps, security professionals, and regulations, governors, what we talk about? Because I know that's a big topic, and it's a lot to talk about in here.
So I would try to limit my response to that for stakeholders that are representing public interests. And what I mean by that is, so if you're representing it at a local or a larger governmental level. So, to Sean's point, it's no different here in the United States. The governments cannot compete with the private sector for pay, which associates with talent acquisition and also being able to retain that talent. You will always have a percentage of individuals that are very focused on the mission, and therefore they're more interested about the mission than, say, compensation. So what if you're able to better position those stakeholders with tools that are easy to understand, not only from a technical perspective, but can also produce work products that are easy to understand in terms of how do these technical threats translate to business or mission risk, which includes cost of ownership and potential liability, legal liability exposure.
Yes, and that's another part of why cyber insurance has jumped. Basically, it's canceled a lot of policy just within last year. And now we're also talking with some of the insurance company and how to, the cyber insurance company, how to continuously measuring the cyber risk level of the insurer, making sure that they are doing the right thing, whatever the right thing is, the best practice to making sure that they are insurable. Otherwise, they're just going to cancel, and because the risk is just way too high.
Yeah, so let me just pull that through a little bit there, Stanley. So here in the United States, so obviously we have federal, we have state and local governments, all of which have to intercommunicate some level. And some local governments will actually do what they call self-insure. I am not familiar within the past 5 years of any local municipality here in the United States, and I would also argue anywhere in the world that can now self-insure against cyber risk. So as a result, there is an inherent dependency on transferring the financial exposure to a cyber crisis event to a third party, which again is all the more reason why, if you have a technology that can provide the visualization to what Samuel said as from a compliance perspective, can you demonstrate that you not are only just talking about it, that you can illustrate that you know what you're doing through very easy to understand user interfaces that help drive operational effectiveness and efficiencies.
Right.
Great. Kyle, please.
Yeah, I'm going to take a look from the technology point of view. So when we're talking about DevOps, DevSecOps, we're really talking about automation, right? And it's just like when we just want to, like, when you have an automation, it actually eliminates the manual errors, right? Human errors, and then you will be able to speed up the deployment to the production, right? Deploy your software or hardware or systems. And so, one of the benefit of DevOps, DevSecOps is like you will be able to use, develop the infrastructure, be able to detect the flaws, fix the flaws, and automatically, and then maybe self-recover, right? But you want to make sure that all the systems must pass the security testing, which is where the security comes in the DevOps. So make it DevSecOps. You need to have the security in the DevOps, because when things are going very fast, things could go wrong, right? So, and we all have like infrastructure as code, software development, we need to have the security testing. And especially when we're having a lot of supply chain or third-party open source components, they are within the software or the firmware or just open source components or third-party components. That is going to be very important. You mentioned about Log4j. Log4j has been used and been part of the logging mechanism for thousands of applications out there. When the Log4j vulnerability comes out, a lot of companies actually, if they don't really have a good supply chain or third-party management in place, right, they don't know if their software actually have Log4j components in there. So even like a company like Cisco's or Fortinet, or they actually take them a while to confirm if they actually have the Log4j, because it is actually a big problem. And also we have like a API security. We have to really address the API. When APIs is what connecting all the companies, your partners, governments, everybody's connected through the API. So we're developing the APIs. A lot of companies are using the DevOps. So we will have to actually ensure that authentication, authorization, these are like fundamental securities are in place. So yeah, I think those are just the fundamental security, good hygiene, good cyber hygiene. We want to actually put this into the DevOps, and I think it will make DevOps work better.
Yeah, and so go ahead, Sean.
I was just going to say, relative to the DevOps, with smart cities, organizations in general, but smart cities, with having to outsource so much of this stuff and DevOps, different applications being developed using open source or different types of tools, it's understanding the inventory of the types of code that are in these applications and injected into them so that they know when there's a vulnerability identified, like a log4j. Oh, we have log4j here. So many organizations don't even realize they have it when the announcement comes out, there's a vulnerability. It's how do they even know they have it? They've outsourced it out to contractors who have subcontractors who are working on these things, and it's left in there. And so to be able to go through the applications and understand the inventory of the applications is a big thing that they're going to have to figure out a way to overcome.
Right. And what we sometimes call, software bill of materials, EthAum, that is actually going to be something that's real, that's going to be important. And I think we'll see more, companies actually invest in this space.
Yeah, we had a conversation recently, and the gentleman was saying that in going through some of these codes, they found a table of logins with the passwords that were encrypted, but right next to it in the table was the key to decrypt the password in the code for the application. So when these things are out there and there's some very smart people that want to do things to bad things to smart cities, these things are things that they have to be aware of.
Well, I know why. I have seen my developers do exactly what Sean's saying, but I did with them what actually happened. They told me that they purposely planned a backdoor just because when some servers went down or something, that key is for firefighting.
It's a feature.
So
it's a
yeah, exactly.
More for that.
You put your cursor key and then you press tab for 5 times and then you get the backdoor in. But it's for firefighting. But from a developer's perspective, it is a burden for them to do DevSecOps, if you ask me, because we are not talking about code reviews. We are talking about runtime scanning, library scanning, and all kinds of tools will come up with all kinds of different alerts, you see. So, but when I go into the granular level, I see some alerts that are very high risk. When you see high risk alerts, the tech risk department, the head of tech risk will be jumping around and stuff. But when you go into the real, you look deeply into the alert, it's actually just a small defect. And it's not affecting the whole infrastructure. It's all within the internal network. It's not external facing and stuff. But the tech risk department will jump around, the CISO will jump around, then the developers will start making noise. Then that will cause a lot of burdens, you see. So when we talk about vulnerabilities like log4j, and then like Sean said, when you discover, and then you're gonna find which part of your company has that. The alarming thing for me, it's not having been a reactive approach. What worries me is that how long have log4j vulnerability have been discovered?
Right.
Let's talk about WannaCry. The Eternal Blue exploit was discovered back in 2012, but shit hits the fan back in 2017. That means 5 years no one knows about that. You can use one single exploit with just a press of a button, you can hack into a PC. So I think in ASTRI, we're trying to move things forward, that trying to do proactive cybersecurity, doing things that, machine learning, AI, and stuff like that. I can go whole day about this. So yeah.
Well, actually, that's the part that we talked about the implications right now. So there's a lot of implications just from the log4j, and one of the article I read is going to be impacting the world for years to come, because it's going to take that kind of time to discover with the manual process, with the human process. And also the GRC side that start pushing the regulations, and that is another set of the implications. Now, going back into the topic, what we're talking about, smart city, IoT, tons of them. And there are no code that talking about security into the IoT device. It's wide open. So how can we, as a professional in this industry, taking what we have said in the last 45 minutes with all this complexity, confusions, lack of motivations for a lot of companies, try to increase the cyber resilience. And at the same time, the world is going faster, adding more IoT devices, more software into our daily life. That bridging between the public and private, which there's a continue to be gaps in the communication process, in the standard operational, the standardized operational aspect of things. So there are so many things that we talked about has creating more gaps, and we cannot fix in the human process. It's proven. Human is failing in this. The human process is failing on this. This doesn't matter how many tools are out there. So now the implications. What do we do? And we talked about blockchain, automations. And I think that, Samuel, you brought it up, how ASTRI kind of like a more mutual perspective, acting on behalf of public and private. And I would like you to start to use blockchain as an example, how we can help our audience. And then Kyle and Carter, if you don't mind, please, summarize it, how that would impact our future lives from the management perspective and from the government perspective. What does the government needs to do in the next 10 minutes? So Samuel, please.
Yeah, so Hong Kong is a very special position where we are sandwiched between the Western world and China. So there are different compliances levels. So there was a problem on whole food import back 2 years ago. So when there was a lot of cold food like meats and poultry and stuff importing from China to Hong Kong, a huge volume. But imagine there's a lot of administrative stuff where they have to do an application of importing license on two sides, on the China part and the Hong Kong part, and that causes a lot of human intensive effort. So we were using blockchain to solve that problem, because from the moment where the cold food was loaded into the truck, when they send it over, they have to be monitored with their temperatures, GPS location, to make sure that they don't stop halfway and change things. So we linked up all the IoT devices and all the information that is provided to the backend. It's all within blockchain. So we show the compliances that no one can change the data between all GPS sensors, pressure sensors, temperature sensors, and stuff like that. So, and that would reduce a lot of work of the drivers and workers' application on import license. So that it's not only solving the human intensive work, but solving both the China compliances and Hong Kong compliances, the different parts. So blockchain can link up both sides. It's like a DMZ, we call a demilitarized zone, where this area we don't fight. That's the trust that we are trying to build between two different parties that is totally different thinking, right?
Kyle, what do you think about how it should be managed and the implications of what we talked about?
Right. Yeah. So Samuel, that blockchain is actually very interesting, and I think that's how you build the trust. And if there's no trust, there's blockchain, right? So, so build a supply chain and be able to actually have something that we can use to trust. But in terms of go back to the smart city, I think the goal is really to make sure that smart city can provide a service that's readily, services are readily available to all the connected citizens, right? And you want to make sure that the network is secure, but you can count on that hackers will go after the security, the city's network, right? So you want to, I think there are in the smart city, I think the paramount, the importance is the citizens' security and the safety. I think that's paramount in the smart city architecture, the infrastructure, right? And that there are a few elements I think that is going to be very important. I think it's really important for the government, the public and private sector to be able to share the intelligence. If there is a vulnerability, if there are some threats, make sure that government, public sector and the private sector, they share that information, some infrastructure attacks or criminal activities or some negligence, share that information. And a plan for you want to have a good incident response plan, public and the private sector. You want to actually do some kind of, collaboration to prevent, detect content if there is an incident, right? Eradicate, recover from the incident as quickly, as effectively, efficiently as possible. But that actually will take some collaboration between the public and private sectors. And also, there are going to be multitude of the technology, right? You have the physical and the cybersecurity, manage this physical and the cybersecurity risk, the sensors, some of the IoT, right? Sensors, scanners, video surveillance, biometrics, and so on, right? And also incorporate with data analytics. But these are technologies that require the government to set some kind of a boundary, so it's not going to be misused. And I think at data analytics, I think it's going to be, like I mentioned before, it's going to be something that probably government, public sector, and the private sector can collaborate and develop some more efficient but responsible. Also have to be ethical. Have a good privacy regulations on these data analytics and make sure they are not being misused, because they, with all the new technology, it could be misused and, being taken advantage of in the wrong way. So that's kind of how I see the private and public sector can collaborate.
Thank you, Kyle. And then you remind me of the ABCD technologies when I start joining the Cyberport. A for AI, B for blockchain, C for cybersecurity, D for data analytics or big data back then. So when we were pitching to them, we say, yeah, we do ABCD. That's exactly our roadmap. Anyway, good. that brings it back into, and you talked about the transparency, what the public sector needs to be doing. And that's Carter, your expertise with the public sector.
Sure, and I'll try to be brief because I'm sure we may want to leave some time in case there was a Q&A from the others that were attending.
Well, we're gonna bring the Q&A to the LinkedIn, so you got about 5-6 minutes to wrap it up, and then Sean is gonna wrap it up in the last minute, but we won't take too long. So Thank you.
Yeah. So first off, stage was set very nicely by both Samuel and by Kyle. From my perspective, for the benefit of blockchain, especially for governments that are implementing smart city initiatives, rather than talking about nuanced details, I think it might be a little bit easier to talk about real life scenarios, such as you have a criminal justice information system and you have a high value target that has teams of people that are willing to break in to change the standing of the disposition of the court case, meaning that somebody's being brought in, but somehow or another, the efficacy of the evidence being brought forth is now being challenged because it wasn't secured for authenticity purposes through blockchain. Another scenario that comes to mind is if you have a high-ranking government official that is going to the hospital and is being publicized. It's already documented that there has now been a death that has been directly associated with a cyber attack on a hospital infrastructure, where through blockchain, you can at least have higher levels of assurance that the medication that is associated with that medical file is what it is supposed to be, and not going to be able to be manipulated without having an impact in that particular blockchain. So I could see where blockchain would have a variety of different practical solutions in how a government provides goods and services to the citizens that it is entrusted to support.
Yeah, we definitely hope so too, because one thing that we also talked about is the amount of data during our conversation, the amount of data that how, like a human just cannot be able to monitor the privacies of all the data being out there around the world, being shared by the supply chain. And so that's why that we believe that blockchain comes into handy when that type of technology. But then further to hyper automations, using Gartner's term, how do you hyper automate this type of process, get all efficient to handling the cybersecurity and cyber resilience. So we got 3 minutes left. Sean, I know that you always have burning questions for our audience, for our panelists. And before we wrap this up, I really appreciate your partnership with me and, able to lend your expertise to have conversation like this online and offline as well. So I know that the three of you have been very supportive in what we have been doing and putting a lot of efforts and your expertise to enhancing what we're offering to our client. I really appreciate that. And so, Sean, please do the honor to wrap it up for us.
I think it's an interesting conversation in that we're talking about the smart cities needing to have a resilient supply chain and partners in a supply chain that manage and maintain their own cyber resiliency in a way that is effective to secure the data that's being managed. And the cities using blockchain can at least maintain that integrity of the data. It'll be interesting to see the evolution for the citizenry to have their own data in a blockchain, their own data sovereignty in regard to how smart cities are using data about the citizens themselves and whether they can control that to maintain their own personal privacy from being misused or being used in a way that they don't agree with the government using that information. So I think there's a lot of things that are going to go on here. There's going to be a lot of changes. I think that we as citizens of our own local governments, our own national governments are going to need to be concerned about. But the companies operating in these regulations as we move forward, Samuel spent a lot of time talking about regulators and the transparency to them. Regulations globally are going to increase. Organizations are going to have to comply with those things. They're going to have to do things they haven't been doing before, things that they don't necessarily want to do. They don't want to have to spend the money to do it. And Carter and Kyle, we deal with companies all the time that are having to spend money in those areas now to continue doing their business. And they're having to make business decisions. Is this a reasonable expense for me to take on to continue doing work in this area? Or do I need to go find opportunities elsewhere that I don't have to comply with these things? But I think that conversation, and Carter, I know you and I have talked about it, that conversation is really not even a conversation. It's you are either going to close your business or you're going to find a way to have a good cyber hygiene program for your organization, or you're not going to have any customers. You're not going to have anybody to do business with in any part of the supply chain at some point here. So I think for people that are listening to this, find a way to start doing the right things at whatever level you're doing it, whether you are working with a smart city or just trying to do business locally. You're going to have to find a way to be a good digital partner.
Great.
Thank you. Well, thank you again, everyone. It is time right on the dot.
Thank you very much for
all of you. Yes, Prakash.
No, thanks to the panelists. Thanks to you, Sean and Stanley. And let's keep connecting and keep discussing about the potential collaboration opportunities. Okay. Take care, guys.